what do I call it, residual income.
No, it's highway robbery, isn't it? It's stand and deliver. I shouldn't say that really, because my cousin did a family tree, and there's a certain person in my family tree from Epping called Richard Turpin. the Richard Turpin.
I always thought you were a little bit dodgy. Right, okay, so we'll start off with the one that triggered it actually, or was you sending the email through about the case of the Tim Bradshaw who got put through court for the tactical contact.
Yeah.
On that particular story, what's your take on, in terms of the action of the officer? Do you think it was reasonable? Do you think it was appropriate, is the first question.
Yeah, I was of that rank. I was the frontline officer for probably half of my service. I did 30 years, and I didn't get my white shirt, as we used to get in those days, of inspector rank and above, until I'd got about 19 years service in. So in fact, my maths is wrong. I've probably done 2/3 of my service as a constable and a sergeant, which is the bulk of the people that actually run the job from on a daily basis. And I have, as a supervisor, always tried to look at my troops and I guess allow them the discretion that we were all allowed when we were trained to be police officers. That's one of the things is, we were trained in the law, and perhaps I should have added right at the beginning, I am old school. I don't represent the police service that we see today, but albeit that my heart is with them, it's not something that I recognise as easily these days as something that I used to do. I just want to make that clear, that I'm not looking through rose-tinted specs or anything like that. But I would try and allow my officers, having as a sergeant certainly having guided and mentored them, to allow them the freedom of action based on their judgment, as they see things unravelling at the time. A couple of years down the road, I was a force control room inspector, and I had the authority at that time to arm up our armed response vehicles, those vehicles that are now today all openly carrying firearms anyway. In my day, they had the sealed armoury box. And so I've been in that control room, and there is nothing from sitting in a control room watching a pursuit develop on your computer screens in front of you. And we didn't have pictures with homing devices fitted to the vehicle, so we couldn't follow them on a rolling map in those days like they can tend to do now. So you are literally communicating verbally with the officers on the ground. Sometimes you're asking too much of them, because if they're doing 125 miles an hour behind a fleeing bandit vehicle, let's call it a bandit vehicle, that they can't receive instructions from a control room, do this, do that, do the other, because they're the ones that are actually experiencing the holes in the road, the skids, the swerves, and the sheer adrenaline surge that goes through trying to get to this person and stop them from killing someone. So I always try to give them that sort of freedom of judgment within the parameters of policy. So I'll give you an example of a pursuit that I was in as a 21-year-old radio operator in a Metropolitan Police area car. It was a bandit vehicle. It was stolen. It had driven up from Brixton, came onto our patch over the Westminster Bridge, and my area car picked it up. I was the radio operator. My driver was driving, and that's the way we did it in those days. The driver concentrated on being a Class 1 driver. The radio operator did the commentary. And we followed this car back towards southwest London, and then they came back again. It was about 2 a.m. Every time we passed near a police station, the canteens would have turned out because they'd been listening to it on the radio. And it was like running a gauntlet. There'd be police officers lined up either side of the road with their truncheons, their torches, milk bottles, snooker balls, or whatever it was they could to try and stop this idiot if they'd been listening to it for a long while and it was getting madly out of control. Because in those days, we didn't have Stinger spiked mats. So there they were, trying to do their very best to try and slow this vehicle down by putting out the windscreen. There were more toughened glass windscreens than laminated in those days. And by the time it got back onto our patch, these bandits couldn't shake us off. They were in a Ford Cortina. We were in a V8 Rover, but they were driving like idiots. They'd obviously smashed up a shop, and they'd stolen a load of booze, because every now and again they'd throw a bottle of scotch at us, and it would bounce on the bonnet of the police car, and we'd be putting the windscreen wipers on to get rid of it. By the time we actually eventually arrested them, we all smelt like we'd been in a brewery or a distillery. But there came a point where we thought, we must stop this car because someone is going to die. And those officers in that car, which on that occasion was me and my driver, we had no other means of stopping them, because Stinger and spike mats were out of it. So what a very good Class 1 advanced driver would do, if the circumstances were right, would maybe get alongside and give it a little tap on the rear to spin it out. Very difficult in the metropolitan London, but on cases down in Hampshire, yeah, we had roads where they could do that, and they frequently did. And there was nothing in the policy manual that said that's how you do it. It was down to the discretion of the officer at the time. So that's where I came from.
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective, I mean, obviously the specific case that we're looking at here, it is a very different situation in terms of the speeds, obviously the vehicle type involved. There's a different set of calculations that need to be taking place in terms of what the officer is doing, because you've got, in this particular case, it was two, one teenager, 120, I think he was, on an electric, probably an illegally modified electric bike, motorcycle, whatever we want to term it as. I'm not sure exactly what it was.
Yeah.
So the situation is going to be different.
Yes.
But again, I suspect that your answer is going to be, well, it would be down to the specific officer to look at the circumstances in that case.
Yes.
And make that split decision at that point in time.
Correct.
Is this a reasonable course of action to take?
Well, the circumstances were slightly different in that my little war story that I told you, we had no idea who these kids were in that car. In the case of the tactical contact with Officer Bradshaw, the former Officer Bradshaw, he's retired now, he knew who those two lads were. They were a two-man crime wave in that area. He knew that they were thieves, robbers, and they got offences for knife crimes as well. I believe. I haven't got the article in front of me, Colin, but I think if you read the previous convictions, which were released after the conviction of them in court, they were a two-person crime wave. So he knew what dangerous, what lawless characters they were.
So I think the article says that McGarry, who is the one who was actually the rider as opposed to the pillion, so he's only 17 at that point. At that point, at the age of 17, he already had 40 convictions for offences including robbery, taking a car without consent, dangerous driving, driving without a licence, and assaulting an emergency worker. So he's clearly not a nice young man, is he?
Exactly. Very diplomatically put, Colin. So those officers would have known that they were behind two local, basically, I reiterate, two local crime waves, who had scant regard, or should I say, probably nil regard for the law. I think he said, if I'd have put the gongs and blue lights on, they'd have just turned round and given me the bird.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it clearly shows that these were a pair of individuals that were almost certainly known to Tim Bradshaw when he took the decision to take the action he did. And I think it's interesting to note that it's obviously it's gone to trial. A jury has taken, I think it says in the thing in the report, less than an hour to come to the conclusion that he's not guilty. But that, in many respects, makes me question, how did this case come to court? Who was it? What's not clear is this a decision that was taken by the local police force that they needed to go through this process? No. I mean, you may not know the answer to this, or is it a case of Mr. McGarry and his mate, Mr. Whatever his name was, I've forgotten, I can't spot it now. No. But have they taken a effectively caused the prosecution to take place, or has it been the police that have initiated it?
I don't know, but I would surmise that because there was an accident involving well, it wasn't an accident; it was a deliberate. Because there'd been this contact with a police vehicle, and also the lad, one of them broke a limb in the process. That force would have automatically referred themselves to the IOPC, the Independent Office for Complaints Against the Police, and they would have taken on the investigation, and they've been given this sort of this role, and that they are supposedly, I suspect, no, I don't know, that they didn't exist when I was in the job. I've been retired over 20 years now, but there was a process where it would be referred up to. In our cases, that would have probably gone through the legal process, through the 4 solicitors, and then it would go up to the Attorney General's office, so it would go to the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Yeah.
And they would look at it, and a DPP officer, one of the things that our Prime Minister used to do, would take a decision, and that one individual would decide whether or not it was in the public interest to prosecute the police officer. I did an urgent assistance drive once in Portsmouth, where I actually contravened 23 keep left signs, and it was because it was on a length of roadworks. So for 3/4 of a mile, if you've driven into Portsmouth on the M275, when that was being built, there were 23 those blue background, white arrow, keep left signs, and there was a huge queue of traffic, but the traffic coming out of Portsmouth was nil. So I drove down on the outside, blue lights, sirens, and at the very last minute there was a little dink, and I was doing literally walking pace. And when the accident was investigated, the traffic sergeant, lovely bloke, came along. He said, "I'm sorry, Geoff, but I'm going to have to report you based on what you've said in your statement." And he said, "I've gone over the route, and you contravened 23 keep left signs." And I said, "Oh, do I get a medal for that?" Or, he laughed. And it went up to the DPP, and I waited about a month, 6 weeks, and it came back no further action, not in the public interest. So that's what would have happened then. What I suspect happened to Bradshaw's case was that the IOPC got involved. But then, of course, there's another layer of police discipline, the police discipline procedures. So the guy's got the system weighed up against him.
Yeah. I mean, because this is the impression that I get. I mean, obviously, we can fully understand that there's a need for checks and balances, and the police can't be given carte blanche to just act however they want and take the law into their own hands, for want of a better term. But it does seem like the burden is put on the easy target, i.e. the person who's there trying to enforce the law. He's the one who gets the finger pointed at him most. Whereas, like I say, we've got the amount of effort that must have gone into getting to the point where this young lad with 40 previous convictions at the age of 17 was being policed.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the kid clearly is not going to change his ways.
No.
And it must get frustrating from a police perspective to constantly be dealing with these same individuals, because, like you say, with 40 convictions, there's a good chance that Tim Bradshaw was one of the arresting officers for one of those. Yeah. So he's probably going to be thinking, why do I bother in many respects?
Yeah. Every town, every village, every police area has its, to put them in parentheses, usual suspects, as well as the transient crime lawbreakers who you probably don't know. And the bigger the environment, the larger the city, then they're less likely to become on the police radar. But certainly every town that I've ever worked at certainly in Hampshire, and that ranges from cities of Portsmouth and Southampton, Basingstoke, Aldershot, to the smaller provincial towns such as Andover, we all had our usual suspects. And they were very few in number, but they were responsible for a disproportionate amount of the law breaking. Yeah. And that will probably be a subject that we'll come on to later.
Yeah. Like I say, I mean, all these subjects, they're all sort of like interwoven. So I think if we move on to the next one.